Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you're keeping safe. I hope you're keeping well. And I hope you've been enjoying these podcasts as well. There's plenty more planned in the pipeline. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to write to me as well and say that you're enjoying them. I really do appreciate it. And I always, as you know, reply to those as well. So thank you very much for doing that. We also put this podcast on YouTube now, so you can watch the podcast as it unfolds as well. So you can head over to the Fly Culture YouTube channel and hopefully enjoy watching it there. Today, I'm joined by Susan Skrupa. She's a fly angler. She's a Fly Culture contributor, and she's a lead mentor of the Mayfly Project as well. I'm going to be learning about her fascinating fly fishing timeline. It really is a really interesting one, and the exciting new role she has with the Mayfly Project as well. It's a really great story, so I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. But Susan, it's great to have you along on the Fly Culture podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, hey there. Thanks for having me. Doing pretty well today. Sun is
Good.
shining.
Good. And I'm pleased to have you along. And I know we met and you were very kind to come along to Farlow's when we had the launch party, and I've met you there. And it's been really cool to have you as part of the Fly Culture family as well. And I know you've written one piece for us so far, and we've got a new one coming in the winter edition, which should be out in early-ish December. We're just finishing it off now, but it's been great to have you on board from pretty much the beginning, really. But I see that pre the sort of lockdown that you had a really cool mini road trip around the UK, and that looked like it was a load of fun.
Yeah, the thing that's been hardest for me in lockdown is that I'm a traveler. I'm used to going to places either for work or for pleasure, and always on a plane or in a car. Going somewhere, road trip is actually preferred. So after the first lockdown, and I had an opportunity to go up to Derbyshire, and boy, it's just spectacular up there. I'd been before, but I hadn't fished, and I had access to some pretty incredible waters, some pretty exclusive small streams, headwaters of the Derwent as an example, and all different styles of fishing. So yeah, it was quite nice. Maybe I'll write about that one next.
That would be really cool. And the rainbow trout looked as though they were pretty cool. You caught some of those as well, didn't you? And it just looked fantastic. I'm told by somebody that you got on some really cool water that they wish they could get onto as well.
I did. I mean, I can't even thank everybody who offered up some pretty impressive spots to me, including Crestbrook and Lytton and their 11-mile stretch of the Derbyshire Y, which, I'd heard for years. My good friend Vito Rubino had talked about the gorge there and how it was just so spectacular and equivalent to places that he has been in Italy. And I've always wanted to go there. So I had the opportunity to fish there twice, one of which I smashed my rod. Actually, a fish smashed my rod in two places. A fish that I believe Mr. Proctor caught a few hours before me, or a similar one, which was really one of those moments where I had to take a time out for about an hour to just sit and be.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that. I think I know exactly where you mean with the gorge and places like that. And it really is I've not fished there. It's been a while now, but it really is fantastic. And I've fished on some of the Peacock water as well. And I love the attitude to the fishing there, that it's not, although, it's a dry fly only on their water, it kind of works really well. And even the beat systems and everything else allow people to fish without getting in each other's pockets, and it's really well keeped as well. I don't know about Crestbrook and Lytton, but I only hear good things.
They're quite liberal. Yeah, I mean, I loved how liberal they have. Dave Marriott's over there, and Percy, who's quite a character, and the water is beautiful. It's quite diverse, and again, as I said, they're quite liberal. So I think you can fish dry or nymph, and of course, I'd always rather get something on a dry fly, but, let's not kid ourselves. Nymphing is often much more productive, depending on the conditions.
Yeah.
But I lost a cracking fish there. I mean, I lost this cracking rainbow. I'm pretty sure it was a wild rainbow. It had to be 18 inches long. It would have been one of my best fish. And One of that wild strain there is just so feisty and stunningly beautiful fish. So yeah, still gets me.
Yeah, it's funny how we always remember the fish that we've lost rather than the ones that we've landed.
I remember quite a few of the ones I landed. I think we're going to talk about one or two of them, but yeah, I'm just always amazed at how beautiful these creatures are, right? Everyone is different, I guess, like humans, right? Where they all have, there's a species, but even within a specific species, they vary so much. And, the fish up north in particular, I like wild fish. I much prefer to be on a wild mountain river somewhere in the middle of nowhere, fishing for wild fish. I just prefer the behavior and the environments that you find them in. And that's a little bit challenging, but up there were quite a few.
Yeah, fantastic. So, what we're going to talk about a little bit is your fishing story, because it really is a really interesting one. And having read, and I'm sure some of the listeners have read your piece, Bloodlines, that was in Fly Culture, about the story and how fishing influenced you and how you took time out to travel the world to fish as well. And like you say, some memorable fishing along the lines. But having read the piece, I kind of know where things started for you. But do you want to tell us where fishing started for you and where fly fishing came in and perhaps your mentors along the way as well?
Yeah. Well, I come from a fishing family, hence the name Bloodlines of my article, my first article there. My dad was an outdoorsman, really. He was quite a waterman and quite a mountain man, as I think I described him. He always would drop us into these wild wilderness settings in upstate New York growing up. So I think I probably caught my first fish, a yellow perch, pretty sure on a hook with a worm, definitely on a spinning rod in the North Country. I can't really remember the river. It was either, probably the St. Lawrence River, or actually might have even been a lake. We used to spend our summers up in the North Country. So that's sort of northern part of New York State, way up. And that includes the Adirondack Mountains and then the St. Lawrence Seaway. So between Canada. And there was so much water up there. And as a kid, we just were out fishing all the time. So, my dad was the first one who introduced me to it. And then my brothers fished, my uncles fished. Not too many women in my family fished, but I think we're quite stacked with more men than women, probably, if you look across the numbers. But yeah, that was the bug. And it was an activity just to be, wasn't really about the fish then even. Of course, when you're young and little, you just want to catch as many fish as you can. But it was more so about spending time in nature, I think. I'm a water baby. I think my father probably threw me into a lake to swim when I was about 2. My father was quite wild. I remember at one point when I was about 7, he stood me at the top of a 35-foot cliff and said, "Jump." And I said, "Are you kidding?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll catch you down below in the water." And I thought, okay. And, saying no or turning back really wasn't an option. You kind of jumped. You got up the nerve and jumped. And, that's led me into sort of some of the adventures that I've had now, I think. That sort of attitude.
That must be an amazing grounding, which clearly hasn't left you. And I guess where you are now, having left the US, living in London now, must be, as you said, the reason you need to go explore for a bit. And it's so deeply ingrained in you, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I first went. Growing up, our holidays were always in the wilderness somewhere, either in New York State or in another part of the country in Canada. We spent a lot of time in Canada and Ontario and into Quebec, which is beautiful. It's an amazing way to spend your summers. And so when I had the chance to go to university, I selected Boston in Massachusetts, where a lot of my friends were going or were living. And that was my first real experience with, living on my own, but also living in the city. And then, fast forward to my time in London. I think I arrived here about 12 or 13 years ago now. And I love that dense urban fabric and the diversity within a city, but I do need my escape. And I'm quite good about, leaving the city and getting out in nature, even if it's just for a day. I have no qualms about driving 3 hours to a beautiful beach where I'm the only person in a day.
That's kind of like, I always think that mentality in the UK, because for the US it's standard, isn't it? And a 3 hour drive, you do it to get to that particular stream, wouldn't you? And you're
Yeah.
used to that. Whereas for us, sometimes an hour and a half might feel like a long drive. Whereas, like you say, 3 hours is no big deal in the US, is it?
No, I mean, I drove up to Edinburgh for Christmas once. Me and I had an enormous 50-kilo Rhodesian Ridgeback that I brought over from Boston. And we drove up to visit a friend in Edinburgh. And, a friend said, "You're driving to Edinburgh?" And I said, "Yeah, it's only like 6 hours." "Seriously? I've never driven 6 hours in my life." And I thought, oh, I'm from America. We drive everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting you mentioned about Boston, actually. I haven't worked my way through it, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before. It's a book called Salmon by Mark Kalansky, and it talks about the East Coast rivers and the massive salmon runs that used to take place on those rivers along there
Mm.
and how they've disappeared. It's really fascinating and interesting story. But around that sort of New England part of the woods, you've just got so many famous rivers, haven't you, that are built in American fabric of fly fishing, but we know of here. And I think of the Bat and Kill, obviously, but some of
Yep.
those other streams. Have you managed to fish some of those in the past?
Not too much. Unfortunately, when I was living in Boston, I didn't do much fishing. And my introduction to fly fishing was actually in saltwater, being on a coastal city and having, the amazing striper run there. My first casting of a fly rod was out towards stripers, in search of stripers. So no, I haven't really explored those rivers in the past few years. Since I've been getting back into fishing quite a lot. When I go visit home in New York, I often, now have two homes still, Boston and upstate New York, where my family is. So it's a road trip, and I have tried to book some time in for the rivers in the Catskills, which is the home of American fly fishing. But, it's usually too early in the season, and the rivers are too high, and it just hasn't worked out yet. I have fished my local streams around where I grew up, streams that as a kid we'd go down and throw a line in with a worm. But coming back to them and fishing on the fly has just been amazing. And that's the thing that I think is amazing about America, at least where I come from, the public access to water. And, you just get a fishing license, which doesn't differentiate between game or coarse fishing, and it's good for a year, and you just can go down to any river and stream as long as you haven't trespassed on someone's property. But nobody owns the river, so that's quite nice.
I think that's a really enlightened. I suppose our issue is the size of the island, isn't it, and everything else. But it's a really fun way to explore because, as I'm sure you've done, I know when I fished out in the US that we'd just sort of pull over and try and find somewhere to scramble down a bank that we thought nobody may have thought to, and then you sort of pull over and it's a well-trodden path there that somebody's done the same as well, which is really cool. But I can't let the stripers thing go away because that's a fish that I've so far not had anything to do with, but I read so much about, and they seem such an amazing species of fish, and almost has a sort of a religious following, doesn't it? With
Mm.
those hardcore anglers that go chasing them. Can you tell me a little bit about them and how you experienced them and what you thought about them?
Yeah, so well, I can tell you there's an amazing documentary. I think you can find it on Vimeo or maybe even YouTube. That's called something like 3,000 Miles, and it's about the migration of them from the warmer waters up to the cooler waters. Um, I have to admit that unfortunately, my experience with them is not so successful. It's where I started fly fishing. A boyfriend introduced the idea to me once when we were sitting in a little shack that he lived in up on the North Shore of Massachusetts, overlooking the aptly named Bass Sound or Bass Rock on the Plum Island Sound. And he was a guide in the Gaspé Peninsula up in Quebec.
Oh,
So he was quite a fisherman. And, I said, what is this thing called a fly rod? I've fished all my life. I can do this. So, that relationship was a bit short lived, but I bought a fly rod and a reel. And then I just set out myself, sort of in the time before. Well, no, we had internet, I suppose, but it wasn't what it is now. And tried to not, inform myself as best I could, read books, visit the Orvis shop. And, I'm pretty sure, I might have caught a little schoolie or something, but I was doing it all from shore. And, if you've done any kind of sea fishing on non-tropical waters, or even on tropical waters, I suppose, the behavior of those fish is just so different than fishing for trout or freshwater species, so there's so much to learn about the tide and the different flows of the fish during those periods, and your local area, understanding where the fish are, what the structure's like, what it looks like at low tide, what it looks like at high tide. And I've had an opportunity now to do it in the UK a few times. I think I'm really good friends with a guy called Paul Haldenweg, who runs he's a guide down in Chichester, and he's taken me out on his boat, for years, fishing for sea bass here, which is a blast. But from shore, it's a totally different story. You really need to do your research. You really need to visit the location multiple times before you can even plan on catching anything. And so whilst it's accessible to all of us, which is great, we are an island nation, so we have, thousands of miles of coastline here, and it's free. We don't even need a license, but it is not easy, especially with a fly rod.
yeah. It's really interesting the point you make though about, and you get my utmost respect for getting a rod, going out there and learning, because that's how you actually learn, isn't it? Whereas nowadays, and we're so lucky, as you rightly say, to have the internet, we can learn a cast, we can learn what flies, we can learn even where to fish in some cases. But there's nothing better, I think, than going out there and learning from when you don't catch fish, and learning the whole experience, as it were, of your fishing. So it's interesting how that dynamic has shifted now, hasn't it? That you can get that information more easily and fast track that one. But for me, sometimes just going out there and learning and sticking at it is a really cool thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, the problem with the internet now is there's just too much information though. So, there's so many people out there giving advice or how-tos or all that, and it's weeding through the ones that are doing it correctly, or it's learning the habit well the first time. For me, I'm a lifelong learner, and I've loved the sport of fly fishing for one of the reasons is that I'm never going to know it all. I'm never going to, there's so much to every river is different. Every fish is different. Sure, there are similarities through seasons and certain regions. But, every time I go to the river, sure, I have that go-to fly, that I know will almost always catch a fish. But, that's not what it's about. It's about kind of seeing what's happening on that particular ecosystem that you're in and learning about it before you even throw a line in, and I've spent many days on a river, especially sort of last year was my year that I dedicated to learning, really educating myself, learning more about leaders, setups, different types of different weight rods, really digging into all of the technical sides of fishing, fly fishing, that is. And, there have been many days where I go down to a river and I'm just baffled which fly to use. And I try, a handful of flies, and I watch the fish, I watch the hatches, I look at the bug life. And, some days I'm successful in that. And those are the best days, where I've tried out maybe a few flies and I've done it on my own, which I really enjoy, where I've kind of figured it out myself. Yeah, I think that's the independent streak in me. I quite enjoy that.
It's interesting what you say about that. We're always learning, and I'm with you on that. And even in my path of fishing, I always try and walk away having learnt something, whether it's why I caught a fish, why I didn't catch a fish,
Mm.
why I think they didn't. And you're always, that to me is one of the fascinating things. And as you say, you could go and fish the same place 10 times and it could be different every single time. And
Yeah.
it's having that adaptability, isn't it, that allows you sometimes to make it work. And for me, fish have always been a happy byproduct. Yes, we can measure success by it, but as I get older, the more I do it, the more just being there, I think, for me is enough a lot of the time. I don't know if you're similar.
100%. I mean, for me, being in nature, number one, is the number one reason that I go. Having an adventure is probably probably having an adventure is bigger than just being in nature. I mean, I'm quite adventuresome. I love to see new things. I'm very curious. But as I mentioned, I'm a water baby, and I've been in water, fresh water and salt water, since I was very small. And for me, there's nothing better than to just, put your feet into a river. And even if you don't catch a fish, even if you just observe all day, something about that flow of that energy of the water, I find very obviously relaxing and tranquil, but meditative. And then you throw in the art of fly casting, right, where it's a little bit, as I explained in my second article, Dancing in the Dark. It's really about that dance, and the rhythm of it. And for me, I just find that beautiful. And being in nature to do it, I mean, again, as you say, the fish is just a byproduct.
Yeah, that's really cool. I forgot the Dancing in the Dark one as well. I was so
That's my best
having
one.
really yeah, so this will be number 3. Apologies for that. It was because of the Bloodlines. I'd read that again. It just blew me away. I thought, yeah, this is, it says so much. And of course, yes, that was the sea trouting, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, unsuccessfully, but again, not about the fish. The Bloodlines was a really difficult one for me, because when you first said, Susan, how about writing something for me? I thought, oh yeah, great. I've been on all these wild adventures. I'll write some travel piece about all of my fishing adventures. And then you were like, no, tell me what, why you fly fish and what it means to you. And I thought, oh, and when I really got into it, it became really personal, which was never my intention. And you probably don't know this, but I really contemplated whether I should even have it published, because I felt it was so, there was a vulnerability in it that I'm usually quite private. And so I thought, no, I can't. Like, a friend of mine proofed it for me, who is, again, a feeder. He writes for the Feeder, and is an author. And he said, you need to put in that your father died. And I'm like, no, I can't put in that. And he's like, you need to. It's critical to the story. And I said, no. I don't want to say that. I don't want. No, it's not that he died a very long time ago. So it's not that I have any issues, but I just thought, no, I don't want to put that in print. But, in the end, I did, as you know, and it was quite relevant.
And I think it's that personal aspect, as you say, that makes it so special, and that comes across within it. And, I know subsequently I've put bits and pieces of that article out on social media. And again, you probably have seen how well it was received in social media land as well. And I think that vulnerability is probably part of the lovely part that makes that a special piece, rather than it just being a timeline of your fishing, I guess.
Well, there's another lesson in learning, right?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So let's come back to fishing anyway. I apologize, I do go off down rabbit holes all over the place, but so that fly fishing, the seed had been planted. You were out there trying and fishing, and perhaps called a schoolie as well. But where was it that was a tipping point for you, that you suddenly realised, actually, this fly fishing thing is probably more the direction I want to go in? Was there a stream you were fishing? Were you fishing on the beach? So where was that moment where you suddenly said, yeah, this is for me?
Do you know, I don't know, as though, I mean, Christmas Island was probably a moment, that was quite significant for me, which came on the sort of tail end of a round the world adventure that I was fortunate enough to do in 2017. But I'd been fly fishing before that, but it hadn't really taken off. You know, I had been struggling in that I was working in a very stressful environment, with a company that was being built up to be sold. So I'd been putting in quite a lot of hours in my professional world, but neglecting that other side of me. And I think that Christmas Island, well, I mean, you know, it's hard to argue with that setting, because, you know, you're on tropical flats in tropical water and tropical temperatures with fish everywhere. Any kind of fish you can even imagine being there. I think I caught pretty much all of them. And you know, there's something quite special about that, which I think has ruined me for life. But it ignited the hunt, you know, the hunter in me. And I do, as well as coming from a family of fishermen. I mean, I come from a family of hunters, you know, birds and deer, I guess. And you know, I've done some shooting, but I never really took to that form of hunting. And I think it's maybe the killing aspect for me, which you know, I do it to eat it for sure. But I think that the fishing, it was probably watching Bonefish, you know, and that sight fishing aspect where that hunter kicked in. And then I thought, ooh, this is exciting. This is like, you know, I have to do more of this. So maybe that would be the pivotal moment.
And Christmas Island's a really interesting choice to go chase bonefish. Was that a conscious decision in the sense that you wanted to get a long way away from everything? Because I guess, you know, there's places like more accessible, like Mexico or wherever it is. Was that part of it, that you wanted to be as far off the grid as you could possibly get?
Yeah, your first tropical fishing experience, go to Christmas Island in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you know, it's kind of crazy idea. I'm prone to them, I think. But really what had happened is, as I mentioned, I'd been given this bulk of period of time where I decided I'd go off on a round the world trip. And, you know, it came up very quickly. I had to decide in like a month that I was going to do it. So it was, you know, I was gone pretty much on that one journey for just 4 to 5 months. But then I took really the whole year to do. I ended up in West Africa and all over the place, in Italy quite a lot. So I ended up a whole year really of traveling. But on the big trip, you know, I had sat down and I thought, well, where should I go? I'd been quite stressed, maybe even on the edge of burnout, you know, creatively. And I thought, well, okay, it needs to be in English. You know, this was kind of, I need to go somewhere where they speak English. Then there was a notion of, should I go fishing around, you know, should it be a fish? There needed to be a focus. It couldn't just be this hedonistic kind of leisurely trip through, you know, 5-star hotels. It really needed to be real. I think that's one thing, you know, that you probably know about me is that, you know, I'm pretty real. I tell it how it is. I catch a fish this big and I'm going to tell you that's it. That's what I caught. You know, I'm quite authentic in that storytelling regard. So yeah, I guess I settled on, I had a friend who passed away and she went home to a friend from London, and she had gone back to Australia really for her final days. And so I couldn't travel for the funeral because of my work at the time. So I thought I would go visit her grave and see her family and kickstart my trip there. And once I just decided that was my starting point, then I thought, all right, well, where can I get some fishing in? New Zealand, Christmas Island. You know, it wasn't a fishing trip, but it was, you know, I had this idea about bonefish. My uncle from Rhode Island, he fished for bonefish and he loved it. And so I thought, all right, yeah, what are these bonefish? You know, let me see about it. So I did a bit of research, and, you know, there were lots of places that you could go, but Christmas Island just seemed to work out. And I just so happened to contact the lodge, and they had one spot left for the period of time that I was going to go. But the funny story about it was that I booked my round the world ticket to get me to Christmas Island. I mean, I had to pay more money for this airplane ticket, and I booked the ticket. And then when I talked to the lodge, they were like, "Oh no, but you need all your own equipment." I mean, this is how naive I was, right? You know, I thought, "Oh, I don't have any equipment for saltwater bone fishing," and so the funny bit of that story is, the guy who I booked the trip through, I met him in New Zealand, and he handed me an 8-weight rod and reel, a pair of booties, a little box of flies, I bought, he'd given me a list, so I bought some other supplies, and I brought them with me to Christmas Island, and I left them there for him to retrieve when he was there a month later. And I caught bigger fish than he's caught in his 12 years of going there. So it was quite an epic trip.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that you say about not having so much kit, that the more I've traveled, the less I take. And it just goes to show that sometimes we do take a little bit too much stuff with us. I suppose we want to be prepared and everything else. But it's interesting.
Hard not to, because it's so seductive, right? I mean, I find especially the reels, they're just so gorgeous looking. And when you get the line, that's the architect and designer in me, right? I have this desire for aesthetics as well. It has to be functional, but you know what? It can also look really beautiful. And some of those reels, when you get the colored lines on them, it just is quite pretty, quite stunning.
Yeah. So tell me.
Christmas Island was funny because there were I think about 10 or 11 other guests. They were all men, and there were 9 of them from America. And each of those guys, in addition to their cigars and their whiskey that they brought with them, they came, each of them, with about 10 rods and reels. And so, here I'm the girl who catches the biggest bonefish of the week, and I have a loaned rod and reel set up, and loaned booties even, it was quite funny. And a big triggerfish.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Now, tell me, you're in Christmas Island or on Christmas Island, you're on the boat, you're wading, whatever it is, and you see that first bonefish. It's a kind of cool experience, isn't it? And how did that one go, the first shot? Was that a wake up, or was it a, wow, I get this? Because it's kind of an interesting one, isn't it? When you see that first one and you want to fire that shot off and impress the guide and everything else that goes with it. How was that first moment?
Well, I mean, I can relive it, in my mind if I just think about it. It's so exhilarating. But I was super nervous. And, my goal of that week on Christmas Island was to catch one bonefish. And I got paired up with this great guide called Kurt, who'd been trained by a legendary local, well, most of the guides there have been trained by this legendary local guy who's since passed away. And, Kurt was described to me by the owner of the lodge as, the fish whisperer. He's really zen, and, he'll sort you out. And from the beginning, he could see how nervous I was just about, doing it, casting, into the wind and, casting the distances. I wasn't so experienced at the time. And Kurt just said, you know what, don't worry. Nobody knows what they're doing when they come here. Like all of these guys who come here, he's like, women are my best clients. They just listen to what I say. So, in the beginning, I couldn't even see the fish. I mean, occasionally I could. As I said, the first day, I probably caught 10 bonefish, and I thought, oh, wow, this is going to be pretty easy. I think I caught a queenfish on the first day too, which was quite cool. And then there was an epic situation, which I'll spare the viewers or listeners the gory details of an emergency, shall we say, moment in the middle of the lagoon for me after I'd been drinking the water. Nobody told me not to. So your mind can go there. Anyway, that was challenging, me on a boat with a guide and another gentleman who didn't speak English. But yeah, I mean, so the 5th day was the big day, and all of the Americans had gone out to the outside, so not in the lagoon. They were interested in chasing bigger fish, and my guide said, they're not going to do anything better than we'll get in the lagoon. So today we're gonna really focus on quality, not quantity. And the second cast of the day, he said, "Oh, Susan, this one is big, so calm down, 50 feet." And I'm like, "Oh, you're stressing me out. Don't say that this one's big." And he's like, "No, okay." And then he's like, "Cast," and the strip was different. He's like, "There's a lot of small ones around it, so let's strip differently." He's telling me. And when that fish took I mean, you watch them. I mean, have you done bonefish fishing? Yeah. So you can see, I mean, they're like these torpedoes. Once you can spot them, they're like these torpedoes coming at you. And then the chase because the water is fairly shallow, the chase after your fly is just so exciting. And, it's just controlling that urge to just strike immediately, or like to be calm in it. And when this guy took my fly, he just ran. The little ones were erratic and jumping all over the place and being really crazy. And this one just took off the opposite direction and took me into my backing twice. And when I got it to my feet, my guide just looked at me and said, "Oh my God." And I said, "That's huge." And he said, "It's so much bigger than I thought it was going to be." So yeah, it was quite exciting. And he said he hadn't seen one come out of the lagoon in about 7 years that big. So it was pretty cool. And then, that feeling of seeing it and casting to it, and the chase that ensues. And then once they take it, that I find just so much fun. And I do that every day if I could.
Yeah.
especially because it's the climate, you're in your feet are in the water. I mean, this was all, we weren't fishing from boats. We were all, walking the reefs. And I really don't think I'd enjoy it, bonefish particularly, from a boat. I think your feet need to be in the water.
Yeah. And I know you're being incredibly modest here, because if anyone hasn't read the piece, the bonefish was £9, which is absolutely huge. So that's
31 inches.
Yeah, that's really impressive fish. And it is, like you say, I'm with you on that, that I like to wade, and I'll jump out the boat as well if I spot a fish, and along those sorts of lines.
Well,
and I wonder
the best bit of the story, Pete, though, it doesn't end with that bonefish. So that was in the morning. And after I caught that bonefish, Kurt said, "You know what? We're going to just stop. You're never going to catch a bigger one than that. So now we're going to target triggerfish." The second cast of the day, I caught a 12-pound peach-faced trigger. And, I'd hooked triggers earlier in the week, and the joke was trigger on, trigger off, because it just, they're these gnarly fish with these big fanged chompers, and come out grunting at you. But so that was the joke. And then when this triggerfish came out, I mean, I don't know how big your screen is, but it was huge, and it has this grunting sound. And I thought, okay, this is the best day of my life, and so that's why I say that, Christmas Island probably ignited that, but it did ruin me, because now all I want to do is go to tropical places.
Yeah, there is. I was going to say, there is interesting that you said you like wading the flats, which I'm with you on that. And I wonder if it's a similar sort of thing to fishing a river. And I wonder if, the stalking of the fish, everything. And I wonder if there is sort of a connection there in some way, shape, or form. I hadn't thought about it until when we were just talking then. But do you think that's why you have an affinity more with rivers than anything else, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, I think it's something about you being in that force, that flow, right? And the water moving around you, whether you're on a river with the current, flowing either at some sort of gravity, or whether you're in the sea where you're dealing with the tides. Something about that lapping of the water against your legs and your feet. And, for me, that makes it much more rewarding and satisfying.
Yeah.
Interesting. I do some stillwater fishing, mainly in the off seasons, and I've gone to some pretty beautiful places, and with crystal clear lakes, and it's okay to do, but excuse me, or even bank fishing on a river, sort of in the southern chalk streams. Sure, I'll still go and do it, but I prefer to be in the river.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about the triggerfish as well, because I know for me, when I'd been bone fishing, it was, it's a triggerfish, don't worry about it. And it's amazing now how they've become so popular. And last time, I haven't been sword fishing for a little bit. The last time I sort of saw some triggers and went after them, and like you say, they are infuriating from that point of view. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But great. And it's lovely to see a fish that you wouldn't necessarily, or historically, I hadn't been that interested in, gain some notoriety as well. And people get
Yeah.
it becomes popular, which is great. And like you say, it's another species to go chase. But I'm going to shift from the warm waters of a bonefish flat, and we're going to head over to Italy now as well, because in the coming winter edition of Fly Culture, you've written another beautiful, your third article,
Thank you.
and a beautiful piece about fishing in Italy. And that sounds absolutely fascinating. And I'd seen the Patagonia film with Yvonne Chouinard fishing in the
Yep.
mountain stream. And I guess you were doing something similar out there. And the whole thing, the
Yeah, that
food,
was
the
in Piedmont.
culture. Sorry?
Yeah, his film was in Piedmont, so sort of more to the west. I'd been out to Trentino, but I've been fortunate enough to experience so the Trentino region, which is sort of in the Adriatic basin, so sort of north, sort of west of Milan. We fly into Bergamo. And I've been fortunate to go there twice, but also I fished in Tuscany in some saltwater topwater action in a lagoon for sea bass, which was very exciting. But there's something about mountain fishing, I mean, and going to Derbyshire this summer as well. I've determined that it's fishing at gradient that I really love. Those fast flowing streams and just that flow. It's just hiking in, and exploring that sort of wilderness is what I really love. If I could catch some big fish there, that would be great. But yeah, so Italy was a result of a good friend, Vito Rubino, who used to be the fishing manager of Orvis in London. And actually, I attribute a lot of my experiences and my early experiences in fly fishing in this country to Vito, because he was someone who, from the first day that I met him, we just bonded. And I think I mentioned in that article that I went into Orvis just on a whim, curious. I'd seen Yvonne Chouinard fishing tenkara, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll give that a go. That seems very minimal in terms of kit and whatever. And I mentioned the word to Vito, and he nearly fell over. And you know Vito, so the passion and excitement that he can give off, and that was a friendship was formed there. And so there's something quite special about being in those mountains of Italy. Again, like most of Italy, where it's all based on the regional culture, right? From the food to the wine to the fishing. And I didn't catch the marble trout of my dreams that I'd hoped for. I mean, we didn't really target them. I did catch a naturally occurring hybrid with a brown trout, but next time there'll be another trip.
And beautiful brook trout as well.
Oh, so stunning. I mean, growing up in upstate New York, you're familiar with brook trout, but I hadn't caught one on the fly. And, they're not native to that region of Italy. Well, actually even here, I suppose, but they're beautiful and, fiery little things, bright orange bellies, and the halos, these magenta spots in the mountains with these blue halos around them. I mean, quite stunning. I think one of my best experiences there is that I watched one rise to a fly, and he missed it. And I cast my fly and he caught it midair. And I thought, okay, nothing gets better than that. Like I just watched this fish come up for a real fly and missed. And I've caught him on my artificial fly. So that was quite exciting. And they're plentiful. You can catch 50 a day there if you were counting, I suppose, which I'm not usually. However, I will say, what? I did turn to counting because as part of a learning exercise, I was really looking at my conversion rate on one of the days that I was there, which was pretty poor. I get pretty excited. I'm prone to a bit of giggling and sort of squealing when you see the right fish, and some choice curse words when something goes wrong. But, I was having a day where I just was missing takes, and I didn't really know why. So John Pearson, who was one of the guides on one of the trips, he said, why don't you just start counting? And I said, I'm not interested in counting. And he said, no, but you can see your conversion rate. It'll help you to understand, where you're improving. And, I think in the beginning of that trip, my conversion rate was super poor, probably overexcitement, really. Probably like in a day, 25 opportunities and only half of them converted. But by the end, I think my last day, I was about 25 fish, and I converted 24 or 23 of them. So, improved.
That's really impressive. And I guess part of that as well in those streams, like you say, it's excitement and everything else, but that fast water, we always blame ourselves a lot of the time, but it can be the fish as well missing the fly in those far. I'm picturing, and having seen the pictures, those little pockets that the fish do
Yeah.
miss them as well, don't they?
Yeah, and that's something that I learned last year, a lot more about how fish, and trout in particular, take a fly, and how the different size of fish, it affects when they're rising or when they're coming up, the meniscus around their heads, and how that can, in and of itself, push the fly further away. So, really starting to learn a lot about how fish feed, and how different fish feed, but also about how to cover water, and just looking at different techniques, and see what works.
Does sound really interesting to head over there. I like the whole culture and the idea of a good coffee to start the day and stuff like that, as well as that fishing and, like you say, those mountain streams. The whole thing sounds really fascinating.
We fully embraced, Italy. I mean, we were there with an Italian, and I, as you know from my articles, I've had a few Italian boyfriends, along the way, and so I'm pretty familiar with Italians and Italian culture. But doing it in the context of fishing, it's just such a nice way to start the day. You go to the local cafe and you get a morning coffee and you get your permit for the day, and there's no hurry to get out anywhere. And then you have this amazing day on the river, and with lunches streamside, and then come down and you're eating local delicacies and regional specialties. I'll get the name wrong, but there was a dish that I was particularly obsessed with, which is collected from the mountainside, and it's a type of, I'm still not actually sure what it is. Someone described it as like a type of asparagus, a wild asparagus, and someone else described it a bit more like a kale, kind of wild kale. But it's called radicchio dell'orco, and they make it in these raviolis, and I could eat it every day. So that's quite fun to visit somewhere where you're really experiencing all of Italy and not just the fishing.
Yeah,
Although the
I did
fishing
a
is
trip.
fantastic. The fishing
It
is, I mean,
sounds good.
in that particular region, we fished 5 beats, on a river called the river Fiume di Chiesa, and the river of the churches. And the lower beats are a lot like British chalk streams, but then as you go up, you're going into canyons, and then up into the alpine streams. And to be able to fish that in a week with such diversity was quite remarkable, really stunning.
It's interesting what you say about that embracing the local. I did a trip into Catalonia, and it was similar. English wasn't really spoken. My Spanish wasn't great. My friend's was better. He's from California, so his Spanish was better. But we'd have a Catalan breakfast, good coffee. And then when we eventually got back, we'd have local stew, rabbit stew, or whatever it was from there. And that whole thing is part of it, isn't it? And it had a deep and profound impact on me, so much so that I'm desperate to go back again when we can do those sorts of things.
I'll come.
So we're gonna segue away now and talk about this, the Mayfly project. And you've been involved in, it's been extremely successful in the US, and you're deeply involved in bringing it to the UK. Can you tell me and our listeners a little bit about the Mayfly project and what it actually involves?
Yeah, so the Mayfly Project is this really great initiative, started by a couple, in Arkansas in, I think, 2015. And then through a mutual friend, they found out that a woman was doing a very similar thing out in Idaho. So in 2016, they sort of joined forces and formally the charity was formally created, but they had a joint effort. And really, it's the mission of it is to mentor foster kids in the sport of fly fishing. It's as simple as that, you know, and it's really about providing an opportunity for kids in care to have fun, build self-esteem, and develop a meaningful connection with the outdoors and their local ecosystem, but also to just be in the presence of a safe adult who shows up for them. You know, I mean, it's really tragic when you think about the life that some of these kids have, you know, where they may move homes every 12 months or every 18 months. I heard somewhere recently that some large percentage of these kids in this country haven't even sat on Santa's lap, which you just, as someone who, you know, grew up, well, in America, going to see Santa was quite a big deal when you were a kid. But to think that some little kid or child, no fault of their own, has not had these basic childhood experiences, just I found really sad. And so for me, I'd been looking to do something for a long time, find a way to give back. And, you know, I thought about something around my adventures and travel, or my connection with nature and my fly fishing, but everything that kind of kept coming up or was being presented to me seemed a little bit too self-serving, you know, almost like a business. And I just thought, you know, no, it's not really about me. I want to find something that, you know, my father taught me to fish and I would love, and about the great outdoors. So I thought, you know, it would be really great to share my knowledge with someone else, like another child probably. And so, yeah, I happened to be sitting in a hotel room in China. This was a few years ago when I was traveling a lot for work. And I used to go to China for about 4 weeks at a time, staying in my 2-star hotel. Yeah, it was super luxury. And so I was watching for the second or third time the film called The Hunt for the Wilder People by Taika Waititi. If you haven't seen it, watch it, because he's done, yeah, it's such a great film. And then I happened to be looking at some fishing news, and I'd read that the Mayfly Project had won this Orvis Award for you know, some sort of a recognition award. And I thought, oh, what is the Mayfly Project? So, you know, the idea of the film, which is about a foster kid who ends up being placed, an urban foster kid who gets placed in the bush with a family in New Zealand, and then, you know, reading about this Mayfly Project, which is about mentoring foster kids in fly fishing, I thought, hey, wait a minute, this is good. So we had a few chats way back then, but I was traveling too much, and, you know, the one thing that these kids really need is a commitment. You know, they need an adult that's going to show up for them, because they've unfortunately in their lifetime have had a lot of adults who let them down. And so at the time I was just traveling too much and I couldn't really be committed to it. And then when those circumstances changed and I found myself with some more time, which was in June of this year, at the tail of the last lockdown, I reached out to them again and they said, yeah, send us an email. And then we've been chatting. So just trying to get it up and running here.
And how far are you down the line now? Are you close to launching, or have you got things in place, websites and all that sort of stuff?
So it's quite a well-developed organization in America, and they have curriculum and processes in place and all that stuff for the American market. I think they're operating in 40 states, and I think they've touched about 20,000 children, or affected the lives of 2,000 children in care. It's been a bit challenging here because, again, you know, that divide between the English language, the British English and the American English, and also just our system. So it's, I think, been, you know, they had no immediate plans to launch an international chapter, but because they met me and, you know, we just kind of hit it off, I think. And, you know, they just said, okay, well, Susan, we're doing this because of you. And then I panicked a bit because I thought, oh crap! Now I'm you know, I'm someone who I feel very responsible for things and take that very seriously. And you know, the fact that, you know, these wonderful people who have created this amazing project are entrusting me to sort of roll it out across the United Kingdom was a bit daunting, and I panicked a little bit. But yeah, no. we're hoping to do like a pilot program this next year, this next season. We're defining exactly what that is. The response in this country has been overwhelming so far. And it's been interesting, mainly through social media, where I put out a few posts, and I've had people contact me who I don't even know, who heard about it or came across one of my posts. I was fishing on a lake a couple of weeks ago, and I was just mentioning to the keeper that I was, getting involved with this charity, and he said, "Not the Mayfly Project." And I said, "How do you know?" And he goes, "Oh, I saw that on Facebook. Is that you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Who are you? So it was like, it's been pretty shocking how many people have come forward offering both their time and resources, quite a few with access to water, which I think will be our biggest challenge here. And also some people talking about donations of equipment as well. So so this year I think we'll start off kind of small. I already have about 9 mentors lined up, which we needed about 8 of them to kick off a project. And we're just trying to get us established here as a charity. And so I'm in calls between the US, and I think we'll have a significant call next week, maybe, and hopefully have some new news, or an update, shall we say.
That's really, really exciting. And having looked at their website, it's more than just taking the kids fishing, isn't it? And it really is a great grounding from a fishing standpoint. Obviously, as you say, having a reliable adult around them, but also teaching them about the ecosystem, about the bugs, about everything that goes with it, rather than just sort of putting them on a pond or a river and letting them get on with it for the day. It's a really well structured and thought out process, I think. It's what it looks
is.
to me.
The more that I speak with them, the more impressed I get, because it's incredibly well thought out. I'm someone who's pretty, my standards are pretty high, and I'm pretty thorough about things as well. And, they've created, both for the mentors, but also the mentees, the children, it's a series of processes, manuals and processes that's just really pretty fantastic. It's a curriculum-based project. So as you mentioned, we teach all aspects of fly fishing, entomology, fly tying, conservation, and the kids can earn badges towards certain aspects, I guess similar to maybe like a scout program would be. But more than that, it's having fun. It's getting them away from their life, which is maybe not so great, where there's a lot of stresses and pressures on them, and it's an opportunity for them to just get out in nature and have some fun, even more so than the fishing. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I heard Jess Westbrook, who is the founder, give a talk the other day with Tom Rosenbauer, actually, on the Orbis Fly Fishing podcast. And he was saying that one of the most rewarding aspects so far is that they've actually gotten kids adopted. Wow. By running these kids through the program. So it's a lot of kids out there. I'm still working out the statistics in this country, but there's quite a lot of kids out there in the care system. So hopefully we can make some sort of an impact.
And are you hoping to sort of, I guess you'll be targeting cities, will you? So London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, that way, is that the plan? Or?
Well, I've done a lot of thinking about how to structure it regionally, because of the way that the UK is set up. In America, it's easy because they have states, and so basically they have chapters organized by states, and then within each state they have different regions or different cities. So we'll probably start off, launching this out of London, mainly because I'm here, and in and around the southeast. And the details of that are not clear at the moment. But then, as we expand, it's trying to understand how it's best to structure that. So I have some ideas in my head. I've also had people reach out from different regions of the country, which is great. I have someone up in Scotland who could probably start a little chapter for me up there, which I adore. Scotland's one of my favorite places in this country. So we'll have to see how it goes. Now I'm just really trying to get it up and running here, and then full speed ahead.
So I was going to ask you what plans you have for 2021, but I guess you're going to be
Mm.
pretty busy, aren't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that what are my plans this year? I do try to set up in terms of fishing. I try to set a goal for every year, and understand what it is that I want to achieve. Last year, this last season was about bigger fish. As I call them, Paul Proctor big, and I have friends who laugh at me when I say that, including Paul, who say like, Susan, you got to knock it down a bit. You're not going to catch one of those fish. And I'm like, you know what? A girl can dream. Come on. And I haven't really gotten my head around it this year. I know I'm going to, in the off season, I'm going to target some of the coarse fish. So barbel on the fly down in my local chalk stream here, South London way. So fingers crossed on that. And then, where do I want to go? I have these, there's so many places to go. I mean, I'd love to fish in Japan if I had the opportunity, but, I'm not sure if and when that will ever happen. I have this dream of trying to find a place where the mountains meet the sea, and where there's a transition from a freshwater river to a tropical saltwater location. So, like Hawaii, which is one of my favorite places in the world. But trying to find places like that, I find that really interesting. I'd also love to be doing a pack trip. So I've never done the American West. So, maybe on a horse, kind of packing through some wilderness areas, and go back to New Zealand, because we didn't mention that, but I really only fished a day or two in New Zealand. I know, which I was there for 4.5 weeks. And everyone will probably be cringing that I didn't fish more. But the focus of that trip wasn't a fishing trip. So I do regret it a little bit now that I didn't fish more. But yeah, New Zealand's quite spectacular. Have you been there?
I have, yes. And it's very, very interesting that whenever I ask people about their dream destination on these podcasts, I think that one comes pretty much top. And it was wonderful, as you say, and absolutely stunning. I still think for me, the American Midwest eclipses it, because I like the whole culture that goes with it. And I know when I went down to New Zealand, Emma, my wife, was petrified that I was going to come back and say, right, come on, we're going to live in New Zealand. And
All my
I
friends
couldn't.
they said you'll never come back from New Zealand, but it's very isolated.
Yeah,
You
that's the reason
feel
I couldn't. Yeah.
it's beautiful and wild there, but you feel, unlike Australia, which is still quite connected and has one foot in the West, kind of, in New Zealand, you feel lovely people, beautiful scenery, but you feel the isolation.
Yeah, that was the main reason for me. And so, yeah, the American Midwest for me does it. But those east side of America sounds really interesting. My friend that I do a lot of fishing with, Ray, we were talking about perhaps doing the driftless area, but fishing down through the east side all the way down to Wisconsin via, some of those streams and heading out that way. But chances are we'll end up in Montana or around there. And we're thinking about driving from Montana to Denver or something like that. And just like you say, the lovely thing is finding something along the way and fishing. And that's the fun of it, isn't it? And given the environment we're in at the moment, these little dreams keep us going a little bit as well, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess my one dream is probably a tarpon. I fish for tarpon in Gabon in West Africa, but I didn't get any on the fly, and I hooked two on surface lures on a spinning kit from the beach. And these fish were bigger than me, and I have no desire to catch a tarpon that big. But I would like to go back and get a baby tarpon in the mangroves on a fly somewhere. Maybe I read about this place somewhere, or I saw a film where they get them on hoppers. There's like a hopper hatch.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, how fantastic would that be? So, maybe that's my one big tropical idea at some point.
I like the sound of that. Tarpon, I think for me, and I think I've talked about it on here before, are the fish, I think, and I've been lucky to catch the major ones, but I think they're the ones I could get something for. And I think for me, they're kind of like salmon in the sense that you count them in takes, pulls, chases, whatever you want to call it, and the chances of getting one to the boat are not always stacked in your favor. And I kind of like that aspect of it. So I'm with you. Now you've mentioned hoppers, I'm all over that as well. That just sounds awesome.
I can't remember if it was Mexico or Cuba, but there's somewhere where there's like a hot hatch of hoppers. And, you know, in the sea, you don't really have hatches, sometimes worms and things, but you don't have the flying insect hatches. And to get a tarpon on a hopper, how exciting would that be?
Yeah. No, on a drying effect, isn't it? So,
Yeah,
I've been lucky. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to fish in Venezuela where the bonefish
yeah.
rise to, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Oh,
But yeah, topping on hoppers now. That's it now. So I know exactly what I'm doing when we finish here to look that up and learn a little bit more about that.
I'll try to
But
find the gentleman.
yeah, but I guess it's a easy question. I was going to start to round things up now, but it seems to me as though you're enjoying fishing more than ever, and it's wonderful that you're wanting to put something back into a pastime that means so much to you. And I guess that passion's burning just as bright as when your father took you out and you caught that first fish.
Yeah, I mean, the only sad thing is that, you know, I can't share that with him. But, you know, it was quite a long time ago that he passed, and my brothers fish and their children fish. I have a nephew in upstate New York who is quite a multi-species, multi-style angler, from spinning and lure fishing to fly fishing to centerpin. And, you know, he's been fishing the lakes and, you know, the landlocked salmon and steelhead up there, as well as, you know, everything. I mean, I think he's caught every species that you can catch up there. So, you know, at least I share it now with that next generation, which is quite nice.
Yeah, and I guess his legacy lives on through yourself and your family as well, which is wonderful, isn't it? So it's continued to be passed down the line, which is really cool thing.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking with me this morning, Susan. It's been fascinating. Wow. I think we could probably do another podcast in all the places that you've been to. If people want to contact you via to talk to you about the Mayfly Project and everything you're doing, what's the easiest way for people to get hold of you?
I guess probably through Instagram at Super Skrup. I'm finding, you know, I don't really do Facebook that much. I'm not too into that, but I'm usually around Instagram. So that's the easiest place to get me. Or you can even just reach out to the website, which is www.themayflyproject.com. At the moment, we don't have anything up and running on the UK project there, but behind the scenes, we're working on that. And hopefully in the next couple weeks to next month, we'll probably have some updates there. So watch us on social media.
Fantastic. Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. It's been absolutely brilliant to catch up.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun. And hopefully we'll get out there fishing together soon.
Oh, you just say. I guess you've not fished down in this neck of the woods either, have you, down in Devon?
I was supposed to be on the From, not so far over that way, but I was supposed to be on the From last weekend, and that got canceled due to COVID. And then I was supposed to be in May on Dartmoor, fishing, you know, the wild areas there, but that got canceled due to the first lockdown. So one of these days I'll make it out there.
All right. Well, you let me know, and there's some fishing down here for you as well. So it'll be great to spend some time on the river.
Yeah, it'd be fun. That sounds great.
Cool. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Lots more planned, and I look forward to releasing some more podcasts for you very soon. Thanks very much for listening.